Over the past 2 weeks, Sarah has gave a great couple of messages on soil and seeds and what God might be doing, especially in this time. And it reminded me of this parable that I know that she also mentioned. And to kind of introduce the message today, I wanted to talk about a philosopher by the name of Charles Taylor wrote this 874-page book called A Secular Age. And I have not read the book, but I've read a lot of summaries about the book. And Charles Taylor is a philosopher up in Canada, and he talks about secularism and how secular societies, in many ways, they've created a community where they've marginalized faith and God, and yet there are all these undertones of this search for faith and meaning and the pursuit of truth and all those types of things. Now, a fellow by the name of Alan Noble wrote a book called A Disruptive Witness, and in his book, he actually talks about Charles Taylor's A Secular Age, which again has given so much fodder for people, for secular people, religious people, irreligious people, to be thinking about what are the things that our community, the air that we breathe, the culture that we live in, especially as sophisticated New Yorkers, what are those beliefs? What are those cultural kind of ethos shaping moments that end up shaping the way we think and approach life? Now, Alan Noble, he actually comes up with this term called thin belief. And one of the things he talks about is that there are all sorts of beliefs that we're conditioned as modern secular people to believe, and yet somehow they're very thin. And the reason they're thin is because they are often irrational and they aren't integrated well. And so he gives a few examples of these thin beliefs. And because we become so busy with technology, and maybe even during this pandemic, this is what we've done. We've just thrown ourselves into our work. We've thrown ourselves into the tasks, or how am I going to make enough money, or how am I going to survive this? Whatever it might be, we've thrown ourselves into the task before us without ever taking a step back and really asking the question, what do I believe? And are my beliefs consistent? And what Noble talks about is he says that for most modern secular people, so let's say most New Yorkers, we are shaped by this system of beliefs that are very thin, and they're thin because they tend to be inconsistent. Now, I'll give you an example of what this looks like. So for instance, when people talk about truth, in today's modern secular world, a lot of times people will say this phrase, truth is relative. Have you heard that phrase before? Truth is relative. Truth is dependent on whatever you might perceive truth to be. Now, yet, over the past few months, and maybe even under our current presidential administration, when truth has been fudged a little bit, there's another kind of rallying cry that has emerged within secular society, and it's this. It's, we want justice, and we want justice now. Now, this principle then, that there is something that is truly just, and that we want justice now. Now, these two beliefs, truth is relative. Hey, truth is based on whatever you might feel, and we just have to honor what other people might consider truth, as long as it doesn't hurt anyone. That's normally what we have been taught in our secular age, and yet we also have these mantras. We want justice, and we want justice now. But the question is, which one of these truths win out? Well, what happens is both of these truths become inconsistent, because it's inconsistent to say, we want justice and we want justice now, and to say truth is relative, when perhaps the person who's perpetrating the injustice says, wait a minute, your truth is your truth and my truth is my truth. Now, do you see how this works? Now, Alan Noble would call this set of kind of beliefs, he'd call this a thin belief. Now, this happens in many different spheres, though. So we'll cover a couple more of these thin beliefs. For instance, let's go to the next one. The next one is basically the way of Jesus is sacrificial love. This is what Christians believe. For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. This was what the early Christians believed, that Christianity at its very core was about sacrificial love. And yet, this story has somehow been co-opted by another story in the American consciousness. And it's this: the way of American Christians is to gain more political power. Like, that's the way that we can win, is to gain more political power. And so there runs these two different beliefs, that the people that espouse both of these beliefs can somehow get co-opted into believing that both of these things are true. And yet, here's what ends up happening. When somehow the way of Jesus is sacrificial love and the way of American Christians is to gain more political power, when those things begin to meld, it becomes this really weird, thin belief, an inconsistent, almost irrational way of viewing the world. And we just get so busy with technology and whatever we have before us that what really matters, what's really substantive, gets lost in the fray. Well, here's another one. Here's another thin belief. Equality for all, equal access for all, right? Like relates to the justice. We want justice now. And for many of us as New Yorkers, we talk about this idea of equality for all, equal access for all. You know, what's interesting is that in this past week, there was an article in the New York Times about the Upper West Side and how 90% of the Upper West Side is left-leaning Democrats. And one of the things it points out, however, is that one of the hotels has been opened up for the homeless community because of the rising number of homeless people, as well as the space that's needed to solve this homelessness crisis in New York City. And so a hotel in the Upper West Side, a very affluent neighborhood, opened itself up, and the state sponsored homeless residents to stay there. Now, equality for all, equal access for all. And yet here's the second part of this. The second part is, what are all these homeless people doing in our neighborhood? When did we, I came to this neighborhood to stay away from people like that. Now, I recognize, and all these thin beliefs that I'm bringing up, these are all, they all have incredible nuance, and I'm not doing justice to them fully. However, there's this inconsistency then of equality for all, equal access for all. And then all of a sudden, what are all these homeless people doing in our neighborhood? I'll tell you what that is. That is a thin belief. Here's another thin belief that relates to even the Christian story. And here is the thin belief. My faith is everything. It is the foundational piece of my life, my commitment. Jesus is everything to me. My time, my energy, my resources, my relationship. He is everything, because that's what it means to follow Jesus, for faith to be everything. And yet, there's also this story in the secular world. I just need to do what makes me happy. And so the decisions that I make about my future, about my time, about my energy, about my money is often not made with this belief that my faith is everything, but instead it's, I just need to do what makes me happy. And you can see that this too is a thin belief. You know, I've been coming to grips with my own self in this pandemic. And I've shared over the course of these past few months, all of the things that have taken up my mental energy and my emotional energy, and how frequently the first place where I have looked is, what is a Godward, faith-filled approach to my life and to my journey? And one of the things that I've been challenged in, especially when it comes to the health of my children, to our financial predicament, to whether our church will make it in this moment, is, am I someone who's been deeply consistent in my faith, where I truly believe and I truly confess that God is everything, that He is the one that shapes and should shape my life, that He's the one in which I feel encouraged and challenged towards more generosity, towards more hopefulness, towards more kindness, towards more peacefulness? Is my marriage and the way that I approach my marriage, is it more shaped by kind of what the world around me tells me what love should look like, and what, this romantic version of it? Or can it be shaped by something that's both romantic and faithful? And is it more shaped by this Christ-like, sacrificial, asking for forgiveness, pursuing to serve my wife more than anyone kind of ethos? And so I've been shaped now, especially kind of as Sarah again was preaching, over seeds and soil. And we come to this parable, And here's what the parable is basically saying, right? That same day, Jesus went out of the house. And of course, these parables are these stories that illustrate this spiritual truth. Now, notice the truth that Jesus is trying to illustrate, right? Large crowds gathered around him. He got into a boat and sat in it. Well, all these people stood on the shore. Then he told them many things in parables, saying, here's one parable. A farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell in rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Now, if we can go to the next slide. Still, other seed fell on the good soil where it produced a good crop, 160 or 30 times what was sown. Whoever has ears, let them hear. Now, Jesus uses this phrase because he basically says, listen up. What I just told you, this is really important. If you have ears to hear, not simply ears where just audible sounds come, but actually ears to listen, to hear. Let them hear it, truly hear it. Listen then to what the parable of the sower means. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in their heart. This is the seed along the path. Now, again, there's 4 soils. One kind of path soil, the seed just gets snatched away. The seed falling on rocky ground, this is the second one, refers to someone who hears the word at once and receives it with joy. And yet, let's go to the next slide. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. So when difficulty comes, that seed has not taken root. The seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. So those are the 3 soils, but the seed falling on good soil refers to someone who actually hears the word and understands it. And if we talk about the seeds that have been sown over the past couple of weeks with Sarah's messages, and maybe even the seed of even talking about what does true, integrated, soul-fulfilling belief look like in God, this is the one who produces a crop yielding 160 or 30 times what was sown. Now, here's a chart that just basically goes over this. There it is, the path, the rocky, the thorns, the good soil. These are the 4 different soils that Jesus talks about. He says, whoever has ears to hear, let them hear. And so the question I have for you is, which path are you? Or which soil are you, rather? Which soil are you? Now, here's the reality. There's 4 different ones, which gives a 1 in 4 chance that each of us have of being good soil. Or are you like these other soils? The path where it just gets snatches away. The rocky soil where you receive it with joy, but there's no root. And when persecution, trouble comes, yeah, you're basically out. You're bailing on this faith thing. Or maybe you're like thorns. You hear the word, but the worries of life, and honestly, it's just too difficult. The deceitfulness of wealth causes seed to be choked away. Or are you? And this is the question I've been asking myself. Am I good soil? Am I moving beyond thin belief? Am I moving beyond a caricatured version of faith? Or am I the kind of soil that is open and tender, and even in the midst of whatever might come my way, I allow the seed to take root in my heart, to actually grow within me, to change me, to cause me to be a more loving person, to cause me to pursue Jesus above all else, above my career, above the relentless race of accumulating stuff that the city is often about. Will I allow the soil of Christ-like sacrificial generosity to take root? Question is, what kind of soil are you? What kind of soil am I? Does it go beyond thin belief?